Dear students of class 11, for both CBSE and TBSE syllabus, I invite you to my first video recording from your class 11 syllabus textbook Hornbill about the prose piece The Portrait of the Lady, written by Khushwant Singh. Today I shall delineate about the author and the short summary of the prose piece The Portrait of the Lady. You see, students, the author Khushwant Singh was a well-known and prolific Indian writer. He was born in Hadali district of earlier Punjab and now in Pakistan. His father was Shobhashim. The author Khushwant Singh was educated at Modern School and St. Stephen's College in Delhi. Later on, he went to England to take admission in King's College. After his arrival in India from abroad, he joined the Ministry of External Affairs in 1947. In 1974, he was awarded by Padma Bhushan Award. He was elected as the member of upper house of the parliament, that is in Lok Sabha, for a period of 5 years from 1980 to 86. This author was born on 2nd February 1915 and passed away on 20th March 2014. This is much about the author. Now to say about the short summary of the prose, The Portrait of the Lady. This is the story about the relationship of a joint family of our Indian culture and the beauty of the old world. Khushwant Singh wrote about his own grandmother, whom he had been seeing unchanged and the same for 20 years since his birth. She was so extremely old that nothing change was possible on her part. Anything, fables and story told by her to the poet and other grandchildren was unbelievable on the part of them. However, the author was brought up by her grandmother in their village house in the childhood, because his parents went to Delhi for their comfortable settlement. In regard to the grandfather, the author said that His portrait hung over the mantelpiece in the drawing room. He put on loose-fitting clothes. A big turban was around his head, and the best part of his chest was covered by long white beard, which seemed to the author that he had never been a husband, rather a man of 100 years who belonged to hundreds and hundreds of grandchildren. However, the author was to be brought up in the village home under the care of his grandmother. The grandmother bore wrinkles and crisscross on his face. She put on white clothes, carried a rosary in her one hand, and hobbled around the house in the morning, telling prayers on her lips. In the morning, the grandmother made the author awake from bed, made him bath, got him ready for the school, bound up all his school instruments like slate, ink pot, red pen, etc. After taking a stale chapati, spreading sugar and butter on it as breakfast, the author and his grandmother started for village school attached to the temple. There in the temple school, the author sat in the veranda along with other children to read alphabets and learning religious prayers. Beside, the grandmother sat inside the temple and read scriptures. After the completion of the schooling, both the grandmother and the author returned home when a group of street dogs followed them for chapatis. Thus the relationship between the grandmother and the author was going on. After that, the author's parents comfortably settled in the city and called upon both the grandmother and the son to the town. There, Khushwant Singh was admitted to an English medium school, which I already mentioned in the identification of the author. In the English school, the author was taught English words, Archimedes' law, law of gravity, Western science, and so many things. The author went to school by a motor bus. Naturally, the relationship between the grandmother and the grandson began to be curtailed. One day, the grandmother asked the author about their teachings in the English school. The author answered, and the grandmother became worry about it, because in the English school there was no teaching about scriptures and the God. One day, the author told her grandmother that they had been taught music lessons in the school. The grandmother became very disturbed hearing this, because to her music lessons had lewd association, and they are usually the combination of harlots and beggars, which are quite impossible to be learned by the decent people. Thereafter, when the author took admission in university, the relationship between the grandson and the grandmother began to be completely snapped. Separate residing rooms are allotted for both the grandson and the grandmother. The grandmother then took her complete retirement with seclusion. She spent her days with spinning wheel, telling prayers, and feeding the sparrows in the afternoon for half an hour. After that, when the author got ready to go abroad for further study, the grandmother went to the station telling nothing to nobody. She only making prayer with her lips, counting the beads of rosary by her hands. In silence, she kissed the forehead of the author, which the author thought perhaps the last physical contact with his grandmother, because she thought that while she had been living for 5 years in abroad, perhaps his grandmother would no more living. Surprisingly, after his arrival at home, the author saw that his grandmother arrived in the station to receive her grandson. Then also, she was making prayer with her lips and counting the beads of rosary. But in the evening, there came a change in the lifestyle of the grandmother, which the author never had seen through his life. The grandmother collected a group of women from the neighborhood, arranged an old drum set, thumped on it, and sang the arrival of the warriors to observe the victory of his grandson from abroad. She was so emotional to sing the song of warriors that the family members of the author compelled to stoop her not to be overstrained on her physique. On the next morning, the grandmother was overtaken by illness. She was taken to the physicians, and the doctors advised that it would go. But according to the grandmother, her end of life was knocking on the door. She stopped to talk with her relatives, began to pray and count the beads of rosary laying on bed. Suddenly, a pallor spread over her face, and the rosary fell down from her lifeless hands, and the end of her life grasped the grandmother. After her demise, as per the customary of Hindu tradition, the grandmother was taken off from her bed and put her corpse on the floor, being covered with a red shroud. After a few hours mourning, the author and the other family members went to prepare her funeral ground. A crude stretcher was ready to carry the dead body to the cremation ground. In the evening, while the sun was setting, the family members were approaching to the room where the dead body of the grandmother had been laid. But amazingly, they stood in the middle of the courtyard to see a fine natural scenery. They saw that thousands of sparrows gathered around the dead body of the grandmother on the floor of the veranda and the room where the dead body was laying on. There was no chirping among the birds. The family members felt sympathy for the sparrows. The author's mother brought some bread, made them bits of crumbs, and threw them to the sparrows. But the sparrows ate nothing, they only waited in silence. After the dead body of the grandmother was taken to be cremated, the sparrows flew away silently. On the next morning, the maidservant of the house cleared the crumbs of bread into the dustbin. This is the short summary of the prose piece, The Portrait of the Lady. I invite you to my next video class where I shall discuss para-wise thorough study and summary of the prose piece again. Thank you all.